Plugin of the week comes from Soundtheory, maker of Gulfus. We have their second plugin. It's called Kraftur. Kraftur is a loudness tool, it is a saturation tool, and it is a soft clipping tool all built into one. It allows you to do multi-band saturation, having individual control over each of the three bands with different crossover points. It gives you a single band saturation, and it also gives you a soft clipper on the back end, so that you can, I don't know, it's really kind of designed as a mastering tool, but I'm going to demonstrate it here just with a basic drum loop, so you can kind of get the idea more or less of how it works in a very clear and defined way. They use some unique process for doing the clipping, which actually sounds really amazing. I really like the Gulfus plugin, and when they came out with this, I thought it was worth a demo, loaded it up, and was instantly taken by it. So let's dive in a little bit. Basically, when you start, everything kind of centers around here. This is where you get a mix between dry signal, the multi-band saturation, which we'll get into, and the single band saturation. And so what you can do is sort of shape a couple of different optional tones and then kind of blend them in between. And we'll kind of go through a process for that. What you have up top here are your crossover points for the three bands. You could solo up the individual bands, low band, mid band, or high band. And then you get the single band here. Now, if I kind of pull these guys back or pull them, down here, this will be basically my threshold. So I could pull it down, just pulling them all down together. This will be the single band. So that will always stay at 0. And what you'll do is you'll kind of drive the signal into it, right, for one level of saturation, and then we can pull these down individually for their own level or balance of saturation. Right now, these are kind of linked together, but I can unlink them and then also kind of move them individually, so each one will have its own kind of threshold setting for saturation. Okay, all right, so that's the basics of it there. Couple of cool features which you're going to see me use. I'm going to leave this in, which is the match control. So when you're A/Bing it up against what you had, when you bypass this, will make sure that the gain stays the same. Otherwise, when you drive this up, it's going to drive up loudness, right? So we'll be able to hear how much it's kind of driving as we sort of push into it. So we'll get into that in a second. There's a soft clipper on the end, which you can turn off. So that will basically operate at the ceiling. You could adjust the output level manually. Okay, so you could just, kind of set it there. This will kind of link them together. There's a separate gain control and a ceiling control. So I can set a ceiling where it caps it. Nothing will ever go above that certain level. And then we have a gain control. Here, the gain control feeds into the clipper. Okay, so, and the clipper operates at the ceiling. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back here, I don't know, like maybe 6 dB or so. I'll just leave it 7 dB. Okay. So let's start by having a listen. Now, when we load it up, if we load it up just from the basic, preset, the settings are there. There will be no clipping occurring, okay, but the processors are active. Just kind of an FYI here. So let's kind of take a look at it. Let's basically listen to what the original loop is and then start to play around with it. All right, so nothing there. All right, so now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to single band mode, and I'm going to move the drive control to start to bring in some saturation. So now what we have here is just the single band saturation, right? So I've moved my mix control over to that. Normally, if this match isn't on, when I put this drive up, it's going to raise the gain in the same way that if you, bring in a maximizer and you pull down the threshold and it automatically pulls up the gain, or you push the gain up into a threshold, which is basically the way that this works. There are also two other controls here, an offset and a knee control, which I'll explain in a little bit. So now I got like a basic saturation there. Now I can actually kind of adjust relative to this setting here, the saturation for the low bands. Now what I can do here for the multiband, And so now I'm only monitoring the multiband. So I could pull this back and have no saturation whatsoever, right? I could take these and with each of the individual bands, pull them right out of the way and there'll be no saturation, right? So that'll just kind of take them out of the picture, okay? This is the 0 point. You could see it pulls it up. Or I could drive it more, which is what I'm going to do. So we'll start with the low end. Now, one thing here that will happen here, if I take the match off, like if I solo this up, it's going to add all of this gain here. So what I'm going to try to do here is just to pull this down so we could solo up and hear what the individual bands are. Apparently it operates, hold on, let me take that out. Right, so that operates independent of this. That's fun. Because it actually makes it harder to use, but we can kind of, kind of hear the individual bands that way. So hopefully that didn't blow anything up too much. Let's kind of go, let's just kind of do it a little bit more the way we're doing it here with the match control. Hold on. All right, so I get the saturation between 555 and 3500. And this is high band. So I'm going to go aggressive with this. Now, I don't need to pull this down. I'm just kind of doing it so you can kind of hear what each individual one is doing because the solo seems to bypass the output gain. Now I have the ability to kind of balance all of this together. So now if I go to just dry signal, right? So if you get kind of the basic workflow of it here, it's actually pretty straightforward, right? And this is a kind of the way that I've been playing around with it, sort of giving myself essentially 3 different things. The dry signal is just a dry signal, okay? And the drive control doesn't affect the dry signal at all. I have the single band saturation. I have the multi-band saturation. Now, there's 2 other controls here, which I haven't brought in, because right now we're at a hard knee. There is the knee control, and the knee control does exactly what you'd expect it to do. It softens basically the onset of saturation, right? Or kind of the way that it kind of comes in, right? In the same way that a knee control would do the same with the attack of a compressor, sort of ramp it in basically instead of having it attack aggressively. Then there's an offset control, which looks very similar. Like if you look at this, that looks a lot like this. Except what it does is it kind of digs down like a little bit deeper. You notice that it kind of goes all the way down to here in a way that the knee control doesn't quite as much. So there's some combination of the 2 that will allow you to sort of shape what you're doing here as well. So if I start with this, yeah, let's just start with this and just see if I can shape it. Now, this will affect both the single band and the multi-band. Okay, so it is affecting both. Let's just check out the difference here. Let's see how that affects the single band. Bit more subtle in there, and let's see. The sound is really amazing. It really has like a clarity, like, you know, even with all of that saturation going on, you're not kind of getting any of the sort of transient smearing and artifact that you often get from this sort of level of saturation. And even if you're just using the single band, you could hear how smooth and detailed it is, you know, just kind of driving into that. And then just the individual control here, I'm sort of driving this pretty heavy, but, you know, gives you a lot of shaping controls for kind of doing this. So this is just like thrown on a drum bus just to kind of, you know, throw a few programmed drums in here to show how you can take something that's kind of like, you know, somewhat generic sounding and then throw in and kind of give it some character real quick. I loaded this up and I was really blown away by it. I thought it was really great. Definitely worth checking out. I really love Soundtheory. I'm much more a fan of companies that only release a few plugins but make them really good. And these guys are obviously right in that realm. So check it out. Kraftur by Soundtheory. And it is the plugin of the week at Mixing with Mike.